Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, so today we have Dr. Dennis Kappen. But before we get started, Dr. Dennis, can you let us know if you are prepared to engage?
I am.
Let's do this, because Dennis is a professor at the Faculty of Applied Sciences and Technology at Humber College in Toronto, Canada. He's a leading expert in UX design, human interaction design, industrial design, ergonomics, and human factors. He has more than 25 years of experience in the field. His recent doctorate in 2017 in computer science from the University of Ontario, Canada, focused on assistive technology, older adults, and the use of gameful technology. His dissertation, Adaptive Engagement for Older Adults Through Gamification, was in the research and design of assistive technologies utilizing gamification strategies, facilitating physical activity among older adults. Through motivational affordances and gameful technology, his gamification framework, called the Kaleidoscope of Effective Gamification, has been pretty well received by academia and researchers as a tool that provides step-by-step methodology for designing gamification applications. And we will get into details about that, Dennis, in a while. But before we get started, is there anything that we missed out on that interview that perhaps we should know?
No, that is a perfectly thankful introduction. Thank you so much,
Thanks to you for being with us today, Dennis, because we know professors, Ph.Ds are, as many of us as well, very busy people. And we were talking in the pre-chat about the conferences you're going to, which ones you decide to go, which ones you don't go, which makes sense. You have to choose, and saying yes to one thing is saying no to other things. So that's an important strategy when deciding what are the things that you're going to do. So Dennis, we've been talking about what you've been doing, what's your experience, but what does a regular day or a regular week with Dennis look like?
I think that's a very interesting question, because it is quite a hectic experience for me, because I wear many hats, like that of a professor, a researcher, and that of a consultant in no specific order. So I teach in the Bachelor of Industrial Design program. So I have about 40 students in my capstone research class, where I co-teach and I mentor these students through the process of design, to the process of problem finding, identification, and design solutions. So there's meetings with these students. I teach a full load of courses, which in Canada means you're a full-time professor. So I teach almost close to 4 to 5 hours a day. Luckily, it's
wow, that's a lot of hours.
Yes, and it tends to luckily be focused on 4 days a week. And in a day, I have to meet with students and also try and appraise them about their different strategies, and also have to meet with faculty members, sometimes also look at potential research projects and consulting projects. And then nowadays, as usual, it is so important to catch up on your writing and also your social media activities, which it can be quite draining,
Absolutely.
So, but all things said and done, it's good to be busy.
I was talking, I just came back from a conference, and I'm trying to remember who it was I was talking with, that we were talking about the whole thing that we're like constantly super busy in these days. I don't know if it's just me, but I think there's some sort of a trend in the world for us humans to be busy all the time and having a lot of things on our plates. Don't you feel that way, Dennis?
I think it is so true, because we are so wired with technology now, and there used to be a time when you wake up in the morning and you go to the washroom, but nowadays you wake up in the morning and you the first thing you reach for is your phone, and suddenly you are connected to the entire world. Unfortunately, it's becoming so connected, which can also be a bad thing.
Yeah, a bit too much.
a bit too much, you know. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm trying for my tech hygiene to drop the telephone outside of my bedroom where me and my wife, and
yeah.
we both do try to do that. And in the morning, I try to go for the washroom before and a glass of water before grabbing the phone.
I know it is really amazing that I think I was into trying to do a social media cleansing for myself, you know,
Hmm.
just so that I can keep away from this unfortunately necessary marketing activity.
That's true. That's true. Dennis, I know that you're doing a bunch of amazing things right now, but our audience likes to know about the amazing things that you do, but also of a time when it didn't go as well as perhaps you expected. What we would like to call a fail or a first attempt in learning, because it's not just about the times you get it right, but it's about the times you don't get it right as well that we learn a lot. Do you have an experience that you would like to call your favorite failure so that we can get more into this topic? Is there such a story that you can tell us today?
Yeah, it's perfect because I think there were many failures, and in my mind, these are the building blocks to success. Uh, all I think about is that one needs to persist and persevere, learn from failures to succeed, you know, which makes the achievement worthwhile. So basically, at the core, I'm an industrial designer, and I was luckily introduced to gamification by Dr. Leonard Nake, one of my two PhD supervisors, and who has been an inspiring proponent of gamification and who was in your prior Professor Game
Yes,
podcast,
indeed.
you know. And so this was the time when I was into my initial research of designing affordances for older adults' physical activity, and that direction seemed to clear up through a haze of confusion, you know. So finally, one of the major failures was, or I should say, an epic fail, was when I was working on this physical activity gamification app in this domain towards the second year of my PhD. So we had done a few focus group sessions with older adults in the age range of 50 to 65 and 65 plus. We had talked to physical trainers, and then we finally built a physical activity set of quests and had this app in a sort of a wireframe mode in the phase of pilot testing with a few participants. The epic fail that happened was, which helped us uh, later on, was that the pilot exposed the flaws of the app of not being able to adapt or transform to the varying ability and capability of older adults. And this was complex because uh, we understand that people have personalities with a lot of different divergent motivational goals. To add to this complexity, we have age-related challenges such as physical impairment, cognitive decline, balance issues, challenges with onboarding, and even, for example, acceptance of technology. So there are such a lot of variables in this equation. So there could not be a one size fits all solution. And so this was a real challenge because the app would not transform or change or adapt to these variations or variances that is available in a each individual personality that we were trying to look at, you know?
Of course.
Yeah, so we had just scratched the surface of this complex puzzle. So this fail happened quite early on because we realized that to do this was we had to go back to the drawing board, and we went back and studied the motivations of older adults to engage in physical activities based on their intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. And then finally, we came up with a solution that had uh, essentially uh, it was essentially based on an exercise motivation technology framework where we finally decided to define uh, the app based on desirability, which was essentially short-term goals and long-term goals. We tried to incorporate the various barriers for engagement, which essentially meant try to consider the age-related challenges, the challenges of the current health conditions, the type of exercises, the type of exercise intensities, and we finally built a knowledge-based expert system with gamification elements. So this system was quite interesting because the end result was a database of 1,200 plus exercise routines, which could be personalized for older adults in the form of roadmaps over an 8-week session, say, for example, but customized to participants' individual challenges or abilities that we had to do. So this was then put into beta testing. So in my understanding, the epic fail that happened earlier led us to a much bigger opportunity and a bigger understanding of how we could deal with the challenges of designing and customizing for this specific demographic. And that is quite exciting for us, you know?
That sounds really, really exciting as well. And as you can see from the story engagers, I think that one of the main features, besides, of course, understanding which was the fail in itself, is realizing the fact that failure is not final, it's not fatal, it's not the end of the world, it's not the end of your work. It can actually be an enhancement to what you're creating. It can be something fantastic for you to create something even a lot better than you were thinking of creating at the start, which is, I'm certain you always have all these amazing creations and things in your head, but it can be even better than what you had imagined at the beginning, as it was the case with Dr. Kappen, as he was narrating there. I would say that would be, for me, at least from hearing your story, that would be for me the main lesson learned. Is there anything else that you would like to make sure that we take away from your story, Dennis?
I think that is perfect because you stumble many times, but you just pick up yourself and move on, because research is all about understanding people, understanding the demographics. So a nuanced understanding is much better than a biased understanding, you know?
Yes. The stronger the understanding, the better, because we have to understand who we are creating for. I am a complete paladin for that. I think it's fundamental that we understand who we're creating our things for. And in that same sense of that massive success that came actually after that failure that you had, Dennis, is there an example of what you would say has been a big, or maybe even the biggest challenge that you've faced and actually solved using gamification?
Well, I guess I think if you look at it, for example, physical activity as an idea, I mean, it's important for all of us. But I doubt many of us wake up in the morning and jump out of bed and say, hey, let's do some physical activity, you know? I doubt many of us do that. But for many people, including myself, it's a chore. It's a dreadful activity to be done, where we tend to drag ourselves through to keep doing these exercise routines for the betterment of our physique and our health, you know? So it's unfortunate that we have to work so hard to maintain our strength, endurance, and our flexibility. So sitting is the new smoking and silent killer. We all know that. So that's why I think the challenge that I solved during my PhD quest, was that the realization that one size fits all cannot be a solution. And the way we used the methods was to build on and define what I mentioned earlier, the exercise motivation technology framework, which is a tool which combined desirability, or in simple terms, motivation, customization, or you can say the ability differentiation possibilities, and lastly, the affordances or gamification elements of how we could engage and experience this element of feeling motivated to do physical activity, you know, do these things so that it doesn't feel like a chore. It doesn't feel like, oh, it's dreadful, let's not do this, you know, because our research showed us that in the course of our journey, many people don't even want to even get out of bed, you know. The very fact that the idea of getting up and doing something is also challenging. And that's why we thought of differentiating the aspects of motivation into short-term goals and long-term goals so that you have smaller ideas or smaller what you call steps that you can conquer so that it can lead to a bigger milestone for you in later to enhance your health and wellness aspect of your being, you know.
Yeah, those micro steps that lead you into that future, because to get somewhere, the first thing that you need to do is take that first step, and then it's the next one and the next one, and that's, if we understand how to nudge people or how to help them find the motivation to take those steps, that in the end, maybe in that second when they say, oh, I should get up and go for a jog, or I should get up and do some physical activity, at that second you say, oh, I really don't want to do it. But in the big picture, these people are committing to this because they know it's something good for them. So it's giving them a nudge of something that they actually want to do, and helping them get through that moment of, I just don't want to get out of bed. And I think it's a fantastic thing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So, Dennis, you've been telling us about these fantastic projects that you've been working on, but I want to make sure as well that we understand a little bit more of how you get to these conclusions, how you arrive to these designs. And you've been mentioning a lot about your process, about the affordances and so on. Can you tell us in I don't know, like maybe 5 minutes? Of course, this is going to be a big summary. We'll see where we can find out more about your work. But what does your process for gamification look like?
I think, going back a little bit, like in 2013, when I was introduced to this concept of gamification, I realized that while this domain was fairly new, there were very few frameworks that was available then. Of course, mind you, there are lots of frameworks on gamification now. At that time, that explained the process of how to use gamification as a strategy. So coming into the PhD program from a consulting and a design background, there were a lot of academic terminologies that seemed complex and convoluted. And for me, it was like a deer caught in the headlights, you know. And so it was crazy at that time. And coming from design perspective, we tend to always want to visualize a construct or visualize certain steps. And that's why I tend to go back to the Kaleidoscope model that I built, which I believe was a layered and a three-dimensional model, where the simple premise was, say, for example, in order to have effective gamification, the first and foremost thing is you have to define the first layer called as the motivated behavior layer, which in simple terms means, okay, let's first identify the intrinsic motivation of the set demographic that we're talking about. For example, like if you're trying to design an app, say, for example, to impress upon people the concept of recycling, there is no point in adding points, badges, and leaderboards until and unless we understand what appeals to the intrinsic motivation of the demographic, or define a behavior change mechanism for saving planet Earth. What's the point in doing adding extrinsic motivators if the intrinsic motivation to save planet Earth is not there? So how do we create these? How do we understand and define the motivation behind it first? Then the second layer is to design the game experience layer, which essentially means let's take the motivation that we have identified and design the experience to leverage that motivation, and that we can do, as we all know, using standard achievements, challenges, and actions. And I think the greatest example that I can give here is the Disney. They sell alternative lifestyles in such a beautiful manner. People go there to experience it, and that experiential state is so fantastic that we come back, and those are memorable, enchanting experiences. So the idea of taking the motivation, leveraging it into an experience, and then comes the third layer, which is the game process layer, which you would use game elements say, for example, to interject and create your gameplay for the entire experience to facilitate the experience. And then finally, the fourth layer was let's not forget the fun, because people want to engage because they want to have fun. There should be some element of playfulness in this entire equation, because otherwise, what is it that is going to keep people to come back and sustain this activity for a longer period of time? Because you want people to, or a specific demographic, to use the app or the system or the artifact on a continued basis for a longer time, as opposed to trying it out for a couple of weeks and then letting it go, So that's the model that I seem to always go back to, because that seems to be like a what I call it as a checklist, as a toolkit. And I think my paper with Dr. Nake in 2013 also indicates the various checklists which may be beyond the discussion that we have right now.
Fantastic. Where can we find that paper? Is it available openly?
Yes, it's available openly on the HCI Games Group website, and also on the ACM Digital Library. It's easy to find out, and just Google the Kaleidoscope of Effective Gamification, and that should be easily available,
Fantastic. We will look it up and put it in the show notes. You just engage us. You go to professorgame.com and you put in the search bar, you put Dennis, Dennis, and you'll find this episode. Look there for the links, and you have everything right next to your hand. Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's at RobAlvarezB and hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement. And Dennis, now we would like to know, what is something that you think sort of a best practice, or something that you think that almost any gamification project could benefit from?
I think I want to echo some of the advice that has been said in the past by many of the experts on your podcast here, because I think understanding the needs, wants, and motivations of the users to do anything is extremely, extremely crucial. I think, in my opinion, slapping points, badges, and leaderboards should be considered as a gamification crime, or a gamification fail. And also keep in mind that not every project should be considered as a gamification project, because gamification is only a strategy, and you need not use the strategy all the time everywhere, So I think these are things that I think some of the early adapters, have understood. And it's important for people who are getting into gamification to also keep this in mind,
Absolutely. And maybe sometimes, and I've said this many times, maybe sometimes the solution might be a leaderboard. Maybe it's just points and badges. That could be the solution. But if that is the solution, it's because you made your research, you understood your users, you understood the problem that you're trying to solve, and that's the solution. More often than not, however, I must warn you, that is not going to be the solution. But I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it won't be part of the mix. But bear in mind that gamification is not just that. And I think that's a fundamental point that you're making, Dennis.
Thank you.
So, Dennis, what would you say is your favorite game?
Frankly, I do not consider myself as an avid gamer. However, when I say avid gamer, it means I do not spend 8 to 10 hours playing games, because I don't have that much of time to play games. However, I've always enjoyed the Zelda series and the Forza series of games. In terms of like the challenges and the pursuit and all those things. So that was quite exciting. So it helps me quite a lot to chill out a bit,
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are now esports professionals who dedicate 8 or more hours a day to training for their competitions. I'm sure most of the people who are dedicated to gamification, just as yourself, are not available for that much time. But we do some research as well and play some games to understand them a little bit better whenever we can.
That's true. Yeah. Thank you.
Dennis, after you've heard a few interviews as well. You were mentioning at the start, and you were mentioning Leonard as one of the past guests. If you had to suggest somebody as a future guest of the Professor Game podcast, who would that person be?
I think, before I mention the names, I think it's awesome that you have this podcast, and it is good to have
Thank you very much.
Good to have listened to such diverse experiences in gamification. At the same time, I think it'll also be good to listen to, I think, Dr. Elisa Meckler and Dr. Rita Orji, and maybe look at their vantage thoughts on gamification and persuasive technology, because that could be an interesting, take on this conversation.
That sounds absolutely fantastic and very right on the spot of the topic. So, Dennis, after this, you mentioned these two people, and of course you're giving your recommendations, people you think we should listen to as well. Is there any book that you recommend to the engagers, and why would you recommend that book?
I've always liked the book Drive by Daniel Pink. I think it's quite popular and quite interesting, because it talks of the constructs of intrinsic motivation, especially like achievement, mastery, and purpose. And those are triggers that excites us. That those are triggers for us to do anything. I also like the book Designing for Behavior Change by Stephen Wendell. I think it's the book name is Designing for Behavior Change: Applying Psychology and Behavioral Economics. By Stephen Wendell. It has some key points for designers on deciphering motivation, because that, I think, is the core construct that all experts and proponents of gamification are trying to say here. Understand motivation, and it's such a complex phenomenon. So I think these two books help us, get there to a certain extent.
Yeah, as you were mentioning at the start, one of the main things that you have to look at is what are the motivations of the people that you're designing for, and I think those are very, very valid and valuable books to read to understand those motivations. And Dennis, what would you say, now you've been talking about other people, but about yourself? I know this is a difficult question, but what would you say is your superpower as a gamification consultant or designer and researcher?
I think the essential thing that I have to say here is that my years of experience with design consulting and research is a good combination, because design consulting normally tends to lead to making an artifact. Research is the finding aspect of the entire process. So analysis has been a good strength that I have, and having the ability to use research tools and use the research methods, and then using the findings to transform, the findings into a viable, tangible artifact for practical applications. That's a good skill to have. I'm not saying that this is I'm the only person here available with that skill. There are many who have this skill, but it's a good combination of design consulting and design and experience and research. It becomes to be a good intersection for myself,
Absolutely, and who would say that the only one with flying powers or with strength powers is Hulk, for example? There's many strong characters in the Marvel universe and in the DC comics as well, so having a superpower doesn't need to be exclusive.
Exactly, very true, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's very, very welcome to have people who are complementary, but as well that it can reinforce sometimes some of the things that we need to do. Sometimes we partner up with people who have similar strengths so that we can power them up, or who have complementary strengths as well. And that's fantastic. That's a great superpower, actually. I think it's a lot of experience that can come from different places as well, and that can help you very much in that path.
Fantastic, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Dennis, now we're going into the slightly gamified sort of random question that we have in the podcast. So this person right here, this person is asking, is it better to focus on video games, board games, sports games, or other types of games to learn from mechanics to apply and get inspiration? What do you think of this?
I think that's a great question because each of these different genres have a different gameplay element in this entire picture. So I think it's always going back to understanding, like for example, Trivial Pursuit, for example, like what was the experience that we're selling, or Monopoly, for example, and what was that experience that engaged people to spend such a lot of time trying to sell and buy. So what was that basic experiential aspect, and in that gameplay is what excites me. And so this question is on point because there is no one right formula, and I don't think there's a formula that exists. So each of these genres can help us learn different strategies, and those strategies help us define different experiences or understand the experiences behind the existence of these different genres, which can help us leverage where we want to go with, say, something that is totally new and something that is totally revolutionary.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a saying in Spanish. It goes, en la variedad está el gusto. It's something like where you have variety, it's where you can find good taste. So
Yes.
having this variety of experiences, I agree with you, can give you a broader scope and have different inspirations and ideas from these different things. I wouldn't say, to be honest, I would respond just like you. I don't know if I would focus on one of these separate ones. I love sports. I am a fan of, for example, football here. I'm in Madrid, and it makes a lot of sense to
Yes.
follow the football here, which is a very big sport in Spain. I play video games. I have board games at home. I have card games at home as well, and I play all of these, and I like to learn different things from all of them and different mechanics and different things that I can maybe later apply. I can analyze how I'm being motivated by these things and then try to apply it into my own designs and my own work or my own suggestions I can give to friends and consulting projects. So I think that's a fantastic answer. Thank you very much, Dennis. And now, I know it's hard to believe, but we're running out of time, Dennis. It's almost over for the interview, but I wouldn't like to let you go before you tell us where can we find more about you, where we can find more about your work, social media, webpage, whatever you want to let us know of. Give us maybe some final piece of advice, and then we'll say that it's game over for now.
Sure. I mean, I can easily be sought out on the internet via Twitter at 3D_ideation. And the second Twitter handle I have is gameful playx. And I have a couple of websites, which is 3dideation, nospace.com, and gamefulplay.ca.
Fantastic. Those are great places to find you. Is there any final piece of advice you would like to leave the engagers with?
No, it's just I'm so happy to have been invited to be on the show. Thank you so much, Rob. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have had you as well. I think we brought a lot of learning and advice for the engagers. I'm sure they will find it's a lot of value. So again, thanks to you. But now it's time to say that it's game over.
Thank you.
Hey engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with Dennis. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask future guests? Then go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected, it will also come up in a future episode and you'll get your answer live. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know how Kirsten got started in gamification? Then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.